Hi, I'm Chelsea.
And I'm Sophie, and we are here to help guide you to the why behind your wellness why.
Come join us on our journey. Welcome back to part 3 of our metabolism series. How you doing, Sophie?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy it's Friday. I don't know what day anyone out there is listening to this, but it's Friday when we're recording it, and it's still summer, and I'm happy about that. So today's a good day.
Same. I love it.
So we're going to dive right into talking about metabolism for the last time in the series. And so far, if you have not listened, go back and listen to part 1 and 2. Part 1 is talking about the basics of metabolism, Metabolism 101. And then part 2, we answered some of your questions that you personally had on metabolism. And this last part, we're going to talk about our personal experiences, specifically with resting metabolic rate testing. So, in the last 2 podcasts, you probably heard us mention a little bit about resting metabolic rate testing, or you might hear us refer to RMR testing. And so, we're going to talk about the information it gives you, our personal experiences of taking it multiple different times, how we were introduced to it, and just our overall thoughts on it. So keep listening if that is something you are interested in. If you have not listened to the other ones, or it's been a little bit since you listened to the other ones, we are going to also just do a quick reminder as to what a resting metabolic rate is. So just reading off the exact definition, a person's resting metabolic rate is a measure of the rate at which a person's body burns energy in the form of calories while at rest. Sophie took us through last time talking a little bit more about the exercise component. So yes, we have a resting metabolic rate of what we're burning basically just to stay alive, but then we're obviously burning more calories throughout the day because of movement, because of activity levels, exercise, so on and so forth. So today we're going to throw that in a little bit, but we're primarily just talking about the resting metabolic rate.
Love it. Thank you for that review, Chelsea.
Absolutely. And let's have you take it away, Sophie. Walk the people through your experience with resting metabolic rate testing, how you're introduced to it, what your thoughts are on it, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Okay, so I got my RMR tested, the first time like 4.5 years ago, or oh my gosh, like 5 years ago with Chelsea, where we were both working at the same gym, and it was something they offered along with VO2 max testing. They had both of these things, and I had never had my RMR tested. So I was curious because I love science and the human body. So Chelsea had explained it to me a little bit, and walking into the study day of, you weren't allowed to eat or drink anything besides water, I think it was, Chelsea. Perfect. And which was fine with me. Usually you test in the morning-ish about what works for you, and sat in this big chair next to this machine, and Chelsea explained some things to me, and you get to have your nose plugged, which is, I feel like, my least favorite part with like any type of testing, like with VO2 max test and everything. And you have to breathe into this tube at like just a normal sitting, obviously rested state. You're also not allowed to work out. I think it's 24 hours before. So didn't do that, and just totally rested, sitting in the chair, nose plugged, breathing in a tube. And you're kind of chilling. You're allowed to be on your phone, read. You just can't obviously talk, or you're not allowed to get up or anything while the test is going on. And then you get your results, which Chelsea kindly went over with me. And again, it's your resting metabolic rate. So it's just so baseline. And then you kind of go over your typical movement throughout the day. And then you can come up with, your calorie intake depending on what your goals are from there, which mine were to maintain/gain. So then Chelsea and I came up with that, and it was a great experience. I would recommend it. I then got it again, I think in 2019 before Chelsea moved. And it changed a little bit, nothing super significant, but I was just curious because my workouts had completely changed from one to the next. And I think I would like to get it again in the next year. But that's all I have to say for now.
We both talked about this offline. I want to get mine retested too. When I was working in the health club setting, I would take it. My goal would be to take one once a year. I looked at it as just another piece of data, very similar to blood work. I mean, it's not blood work, so I shouldn't be comparing it to that, but just seeing what's going on with my body based on what maybe had changed. And it was really, really cool now, even looking back, to have that data through the years just to see how mine changed. And Sophie, you and I were talking about that offline, and it's just interesting information. I want to go backwards. I think I had mentioned this in one of the other podcasts, but again, if it's been a little bit since you listened to it, I did just want to mention, so with the RMR test, like Sophie said, it's a breathing test. And essentially why it's a breathing test is because there's a direct correlation between your oxygen levels and the amount of calories that you're burning, and then also your CO2 levels and where you're burning your calories from. Is that burning from carbohydrates or is that burning from fat? And we'll get into that in just a little bit. So that's kind of the short snippet without getting super sciencey as to what the resting metabolic rate test is actually gathering is your oxygen and CO2 levels. The other thing, I know some people are like, well, why would I get a resting metabolic rate test when there's calculators online and all of that type of stuff? And if you think about it, yes, that's a great place to start. I do that with some of my clients. Just like anything else, there's good resources out there and not so great resources out there. So if you're struggling with finding a good resource, come to us. We can give you that information. But essentially, a calculator or an equation like the Harris-Benedict equation is just taking some of your metrics and numbers. So your age, your height, your weight, and your activity level. It's not truly taking any data from the inside of your body. And so I always like to say, just because of the amount of resting metabolic rate test I've actually conducted throughout the years, it's very fascinating because I could have two of the same people, let's say two 30-year-olds that are both 6 foot, male, 200 pounds, and through a resting metabolic rate test, they could have completely different outcomes. So, although, yes, I think the equations and the calculators are a really good place to start, especially if a resting metabolic rate test is not available to you, then I'm not against them. It's just they're not 100% accurate versus a resting metabolic rate test is going to be a little bit more accurate and give you a little bit better data as to what exactly is going on in your body at that exact time.
Love that. And I do want to bring up kind of what we spoke about in the first podcast from this triplet is body composition. Again, because what'd you say, 6 foot, 200 pounds, I
I
think.
just threw out numbers, but yes.
Those two people can look completely different. And that's going to have an effect on your RMR test.
Yeah, absolutely. So my personal experience with resting metabolic rate test, I was actually introduced to it prior to working in a health club. I won't get too much into this, but the first time I saw a resting metabolic rate test done was when I was a student. in the hospital setting. So dietitians, not all the time, but on occasion, would use a resting metabolic rate test in ICU settings if a person was in a severe enough condition that they might not have been able to eat by mouth. And so, why is the resting metabolic rate test happening in that case? If you think about it, if someone is in a hospital for a non-nutrition related reason, the last problem that you want to have is a nutrition challenge or problem occur. So, malnutrition or electrolyte imbalance, so on and so forth. And it's unfortunately very common to see. That's why dietitians exist in the hospital. Well, they exist for a lot of different reasons, but specifically ICU settings. And so a resting metabolic rate test can just be really, really helpful in those situations to help doctors and nurses and dietitians see what is going on with this patient's metabolic rate. And that can help to customize what then those dietitians and pharmacists are providing the patient with in terms of nutrition, whether that would be through a tube feeding or through TPN, which is nutrition through the blood. And so it can just be really, really helpful to make sure they're customizing the nutrition in that type of situation. So we're talking about it more in that like everyday life in a health club setting, but I do think it's fascinating that it can be done in different settings. And that's actually where I was introduced to it as. And then when I went into the health club setting, I was doing the test on overall healthy individuals, obviously not people in a coma in the ICU. So it was a little bit more of a positive experience, but I absolutely love doing them. Like I said, I think what was really cool was just seeing how the data can change through the years and how the data can change from person to person. And it's just really, really fascinating to me. Personally, for me, I am not going to talk about exact numbers, but like I mentioned, I did one. I have the app pulled up right now. I did one about once a year, with the exception of the year that I had a hip surgery. I did it twice that year just to kind of see the difference between like before surgery, after surgery in a couple of months period of time. My big takeaway, and I don't want to say this is a blanket statement because everybody's body is different, but my biggest takeaway with my RMR changes through the years were when I was eating more appropriately based on my RMR test. Well, I guess I should go backwards. When I initially did my first RMR test, I learned through that RMR test I was under eating. This is something common that I see with a lot of active individuals because, especially with women, once again, I've said this in another podcast, we have been told over and over again 1,200 calories, 1,200 calories, 1,200 calories. Sophie's shaking her head. If you've listened to our podcast long enough, you kind of know our thoughts around that. There's very few active individuals that should be eating that low of calories. And so when I was a newer dietitian and I did my RMR test on myself for the first time, I had a higher metabolism than the equation estimated. And so based on my activity, when we threw my activity in, I was under eating. When I started to eat properly and change my workout regimen, so I used to be a cardio bunny that was pretty much just cardio, not a lot of strength training. My metabolism was lower. When I started incorporating more strength training and then unfortunately pretty much took out cardio because of my hip surgery and was eating for my body, my resting metabolic rate went up pretty significantly. Sophie and I were looking at it yesterday before recording this and looking at it here. Now, this was in a couple of years period of time, but it increased almost 500 calories a day. I'm going to round down to 400. So like in a week period of time, that's almost 3,000 calories. And I'm just talking resting metabolic rate. I'm not talking about activity or anything else. So I'm not saying that's what's supposed to happen with every single person, but I think my big takeaway was just learning what my body adapted to better from a training standpoint, as well as just the importance of like eating enough, because I was actually able to personally increase my metabolism in a couple of years by eating more and working out. From a quantity standpoint, I actually was working out less hours in a week, but my quality of my workouts became a lot better. So, again, this was before I moved from Chicago. So, I also have not done one since I moved from Chicago. And my lifestyle is very different because now I work from home. I am not walking around a city every single day. So, it would be very interesting to see now if my metabolism has changed, but that's my personal experience with it.
Which is amazing because we love to hear it. Because people just like, cardio's easy. You can just walk out your door and people love to feel that burn. It's just so different. Get on the strength train, people.
I know. I mean, you and I have talked about it. Like, don't get me wrong, there's pros to
Um,
cardio,
yes.
but I think my situation, and I know a lot of people fall into this, is that extreme all or nothing. Like, I wasn't incorporating cardio into also then doing strength training in the week. Like, I was pretty much only going on long runs.
Mhm.
And so it just, yeah, it was cool to see the data of it because I struggled getting into a strength training regimen. It just was very much out of my comfort zone because I had never done that type of stuff in my life. And so running is just easier. You can do it wherever, you don't need equipment. So it was cool to see the
Totally.
data of being able to do it somewhere else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely highly suggest like strength training being the main thing. And you have to do, I mean, cardio for like heart health and everything else. Like 2 strength days a week, like strict muscle building strength, and 2 days of like 45 to 60-minute cardio sessions would be great. Like go on a power walk, like get your heart rate to like 120-ish, depending on, your age and fitness level, and just like go on a power walk.
Yeah. Walking for life. I love walking now.
I love walking. Yeah, since I don't run anymore. Isn't it
I
so
know.
peaceful?
It is. I love it. Oh my goodness. So the last thing we wanted to talk not too much about, but just a little bit. So oxygen is from that calorie standpoint. So if we bring in the CO2 piece of it, Sophie, do you want to tell everybody what that means a little bit? So just talking through the definition of RER, the respiratory exchange ratio, and then we can talk a little bit about why that plays a role as well.
Yes. So, respiratory exchange ratio, RER, is the ratio between the metabolic production of carbon dioxide and the uptake of oxygen. So, this relates to burning fat and carbohydrates. And my RER did have a significant change during my RMR testing from 0.91 to 0.75, I think it was. And I think 0.85 is the 50-50
Around.
and
Yeah.
around that.
Mhm.
And there's not enough research on RER, Chelsea and I discussed, but um, it's it's known that working out cardio or strength at a lower effort is typically burning more fat calories, using fat as a energy source, and working out harder, like like deadlifting 5x5, running a hard mile, is more carbohydrate burning, more carb calories. And both, like, you do, honestly, ideally every week you would spend a certain amount of time at every heart rate level, to be honest. All is great. You want to keep pushing it and you want to recover and you want to work on heart health. So that's kind of what I have to say for that.
Yeah, so like Sophie said, there's definitely not enough research. So the RAR numbers that she just threw out were her numbers on her resting metabolic rate test. If you would ever get a VO2 max test, depending on the piece of equipment you get or you have it done with, you also might be getting RAR numbers. But like Sophie was saying, there's RER in relation to exercise, and then there's RER in relation to your RMR and your RER in relation to your RMR. Sorry, that's a lot of letters. That's where the research needs to be a little bit there needs to be a little bit more research on, just because the theory is okay, you can test your RER at resting state, and that is kind of showing like outside of exercise, what is your body burning from? So if someone the range of your RER is usually around 0.7 to 1. That's the range that you see. 0.7 means that you're burning pretty much almost 100% fat from your fat stores, but a 1 means that you're burning pretty much almost 100% from your sugar and carbohydrate stores. The theory is at resting state, you kind of want to be somewhere in the middle, but there needs to be more research done on it. Personally, from my experience, kind of very similar to Sophie's, mine also changed. It was higher. I was burning more carbohydrates when I was doing more cardio, when I was under eating. And then as I had already mentioned, as I started strength training more, as I ate more for the right amount that I was supposed to be eating and the right balance of macronutrients and micronutrients, I saw that number come down. And even taking data away, I think the other big thing, because like, yes, data is really important, but I always say at the end of the day, like, you know your body the best. And I think that is on top of all of this, one of the coolest pieces from my personal experience of this testing is the fact that, like, not only did I see these numbers change, but I felt dramatically better in terms of my body composition, in terms of just even things like my energy levels, my sleep, my success in my workouts, all of that type of stuff. That's why I'd be so fascinated to do it now because my lifestyle has changed. And I'll be completely honest, I have not been as consistent with strength training and my lifestyle that I was doing at that time when I was really focused on that type of stuff. So I would not be surprised if now I saw my metabolism a little bit lower and my RAR number a little bit higher. I could definitely see myself maybe burning a little bit more sugar just because I am in tune with like what's going on with my body. So it would be interesting to have that data to compare it to.
Yeah, love all of that. And like Chelsea did say, which I should have mentioned, with the VO2 test, um, with all of them I've done, luckily, like college and at FFC, they do have RER information. So with that, you can see what your RER is at every single heart rate collected. So you can, that's why I said around like 120, typically, I'm going to say for most people, that is going to be a fat burning state. Like for me, I will throw out a number. I think mine was like 140, 145. So that and like lower is great. Like that's where my heart rate training running would be. And then like 170, that's just straight burning sugar. But yeah, great information out there if you want to learn about your body and really know more and not just from a formula. I highly suggest doing some fitness tests and metabolism tests.
Yeah. I know we have people listening from all over. We're most familiar with the Chicago area testing, but I have helped clients find testing facilities that are not in Chicago. So if you're not located in Chicago and you are interested in doing fitness tests, whether it be a resting metabolic rate test or a VO2 max test, please reach out to us and we are happy to do some research and try to help you find fitness testing in your area. Obviously, we don't know every single place, but we might be able to know what to be looking for and what to be researching for when looking up equipment that might be in your area. So always feel free to reach out.
Yes, amazing. Thank you for listening.
Have a good one.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.